Everybody, welcome to week 97. And yes, the 100th week anniversary is coming up. Stay tuned for that. That's actually going to be a fun one. You want to say where we're going to go yet, Jack?
You can go ahead. I mean, you're the host.
Come on, man.
The host with the most. So, all right.
You
all right.
introduced us to these folks.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So the intentions are to go to 820, which is VBGB's sister company, sister restaurant, literally across the parking lot. They have some really cool spaces. And we toured them, and then we were in one space. We're like, oh, this would be great. And then they took us to the next space and the next space. And we ultimately decided on a really, really, really cool space that is designed for entertainment purposes, live entertainment purposes. So we will be transmitting from there and potentially have some live studio audience members. But in my mind, I'm going through kind of making it a little more grandiose in the sense of, really cool prizes, maybe mutual client sponsored prizes. That they don't know they're going to offer yet, but I haven't checked them up yet. So.
Yeah, a little bit of time to ask. Yeah.
So yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger in my mind. So now we just have to actually implement.
I love it. It comes down to execution. But let's say this, it has something to do with karaoke. So we're not going to do karaoke, thank God. Or hopefully we're not going to have you do that, Jack. I heard you were banned from it.
Yes, prior to closure for COVID purposes, I was banned from singing karaoke unless I'm a backup singer to a drunk friend and just providing support on vocals, which because it's all bad, it doesn't really matter. But, so that's, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody that's on here so far, you know the drill. Hit us up on Q&A. We can stop along this way, but we are going to be talking about the 7 deadly sins of value destruction. And Adam Boatsman is going to walk us through that. I'm going to go ahead and make you host here, Adam, so that you can share and do what you need to do.
All right, cool.
And you can hit us up on the chat if you want to harass us.
Yeah, so I'll hop into the presentation here in a second, but probably the first thing I wanted to hit on with taxes is that we've been talking for a while about the likelihood of there being a tax increase in the year in the calendar year 2022, which would affect maybe the 2021 tax year. If it did happen, it would affect the 2022 tax year, probably for sure. I mean, every day that's getting lower and lower. I mean, you've been reading, kind of following the press. Manchin has been trying to convince Sinema that, hey, would you think about any kind of tax increase? And her current response is no. So, I mean, I think the likelihood we're going to see any tax rate increase until after the midterms. I mean, again, not to keep beating a hopefully live horse, because we don't want a tax rate increase as business owners. As a U.S. citizen who's concerned about the national debt, that may be a different story. But as business owners, low tax rates good for business. I just don't see it happening. So I think all that kind of fear that had gripped people about capital gains tax rates and oh my gosh, what should I do? I need to make some drastic moves. I think that's all been punted for at least a year at this point. So that's my opening tirade. So with that in mind, I will go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully this works. Gary, if you will, I know you can probably see the screen now, Gary. Can you see?
Yeah.
Yep. Can you see the full screen now?
Full screen.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So as we've been talking about, value creation and, going through a transaction, Jack and I have really shared, some war stories, but, I think as we were brainstorming topics to bring up, I think it makes sense to go ahead and say, okay, this is the definitive list of, look, if you're really looking to shoot yourself in the foot in a transaction and leave money on the table, do these 7 things. And these actually are in order of value destruction. So I'm going to hit on the last comment first, which is value killers kill twice, just to explain what that means. I mean, what that means is that, if I've got, let's say that I've got, a $500,000 EBITDA company, and I've got a mismanaged company, meaning like I've left money on the table. Well, the first problem is my starting point on EBITDA is artificially lower than it has to be. So that's money I'm leaving on the table. And then the second killer is the potential buyer of the company is looking at you saying, this thing's a mess. There's no way I'm going to pay a premium for it. So not only is the EBITDA number that you're starting at, which is sort of the basis point for all future calculations and value, artificially lower than it needs to be, the multiple of that number is also going to be lower. So $500,000 times 4 looks radically different from 750 times 7. That's like real world in terms of the example of what these 7 things could potentially cost you. You got 500, but all 7 of these are present. Maybe you're going to get a 4 multiple. Versus, if all these things weren't present, even it could be 750 and you're going to get a 7 to a 9 multiple. Big difference in terms of value swing, in terms of addressing these 7 things. But, the first one, it's just funny. All records start with, all problems start with, man, if you can't produce good financials, you've got, or your financials have, questions about them, you got big problems. So that's number one. And I mean, Gary, I don't think you can cut off the mic on me when I say this, but hey, we're actually seeing that in the press with former President Trump's accounting firm resigning. That's not going to be good for a Trump business. When your guy says you can't rely on my financial records for the last 10 years, that's just not good for future lending relationships. So you do not, however that happens, lots of reasons why that can happen. But that's not something that you want to have happen, is that in the middle of the diligence process, the buyer's diligence party says, oh my God, there's a massive showstopper. These financial statements are radically overstated, or there's this big problem that wasn't accounted for, or nothing ties out, everything's out of date. You just don't want that. It's bad for business. So, invest in getting good financial records first and foremost, because the cost of doing that is by far going to be minimal relative to the absolute tangible value it can create by not only a bigger EBITDA number, which is more cash in your pocket while you still own the business, but then the multiple of EBITDA that you're going to get at a higher EBITDA number just by having good financial records. I mean, this is like not having good financial records. I mean, seriously, this is sort of like my youngest son, Miles, who's 16, having the GPA that he has because he didn't turn in his freaking homework. But he actually did. That number one here is the stupid tax. So do not commit the stupid tax. Get out of the stupid tax. The rest of these are a little bit harder to resolve, but they're not insurmountable. But number one is the stupid tax. If you've got a problem with number one, that is absolutely on you as a sloppy, lazy business owner. And I'm not sorry if that's offensive. That's just the truth. You're sloppy and you're lazy, and you got no one to blame but yourself. Number two, too much dependence on the owner. This fits two. This can fall into 2 buckets. One is your problem. The other one is, hey, it's just really hard. So the problem that is within your control is if you're a micromanaging control freak, be self-aware enough to recognize that you're a micromanaging control freak and know that that's costing you money and it's costing you your life. And, kind of commit to doing something about that, because there's lots of people who have successful businesses that are perfectly fine that are not micromanaging control freaks. So, the first one is just to assess, is the problem me? Am I a micromanaging control freak? If the answer to that is yes, do something about it. The second component, though, is that, and this is kind of the world that I live in, is that, sometimes it's hard to transition, or it takes a long time to transition long-time strategic relationships. Like, you can't just do that. You can't just all of a sudden hire, hey, here's Timmy. Timmy's going to be your new guy. Don't ever call me again because, Boatsman said in this presentation that my company has too much dependence on me. That's a multi-year disciplined effort. And if you're only in year 2 of it, knowing that it's going to take 5 years, that's just where you're at. But in terms of the sequence of things to get out of, what we typically see is, finance, administrative type stuff, that's the easiest to get out of. Operational type stuff, that's the second easiest to get out of. And then, sales strategy, that's kind of that's the hardest thing to get out of. So, if you just think about that, from a time frame perspective, those are kind of the order of preference that you want to do. Get out of finance and admin, get out of operations, get out of sales and strategy. But the reality is, if you were in all 3 of those buckets right now, if you did everything right, it's probably going to take you 3 to 5 years to be able to pull that off. So just understand that that's just what it takes. But be committed to it. So, the second one is just more of a, hey, you got to get started, somewhere if that's your problem. Like, you're not a control freak, but you haven't started the process of transitioning out. That's really the process you have to follow through. Ineffective management team, again, this one's got 2 flavors. Flavor number 1, that is all your fault, but I understand it's very hard to do something about, is nepotism. Meaning, like, literally, the reason your management team is ineffective is because it's your brother, Bubba. And your dad and mom will kill you if you fire Bubba. Again, that's a hard one. In terms of having, some pretty direct, hey, we can still have Thanksgiving and I love you, and you're my brother, versus this is just not the right role for you. The second flavor kind of falls in the same vein, but it's less hard, is you just don't have the right people in the right seats. And again, that's just that comes down to being honest with yourself. But where this is going to cost you is that, especially if you want out of the business at some point, meaning like you don't want to be part of the management team going forward in a transaction, you're shooting yourself in the foot if your management team sucks. Really your test on, bullet points number 2 or 3 is, could you take 30 contiguous days off with minimal contact with the business and everything would still be fine? If you can do that, 2 and 3 are not your problems. But if you can't, if you're like, oh, Jesus, there's no way in hell I could do that. Then that 2 and 3 are some focus areas. Lack of customer diversification, really, this is going to be, there's lots of rules of thumb on what represents customer concentration risk. But in general, if you've got anybody that's over 50%, that's a real problem. If you've got anybody that's over 25%, it's an explainable problem. That probably isn't going to kill you too much. So it's that 50% and above that it's going to be a real value killer. 25 to 50%, it's a little bit more gray. It can sometimes be explainable. But that's generally what we're looking for. Poor business plan or market segment. What that really means is, like, you don't have a track record of any sort of innovation or growth, meaning like you haven't reinvested, your growth rate's kind of been steady Eddie, 2 to 5%, maybe it's 10% or whatever. You're not really considered, a market leader per se. You're just good, not necessarily great. Or it's a market segment that is highly commodity driven, and you're just one of many, many players with a switching cost that's very, very low. Some of these things you can do something about, some of them you can't, but even, I think Gary and I would probably argue that even if you're in a commodity low switching costs, there's still ways to differentiate yourself and dominate the market somehow. So these are really just people that are like, hey, I have good numbers, but there really is nothing special about me at all. That's really where number 5 shows up. Process is not scalable, meaning like, that kind of speaks for itself. If it takes, 2 people to do $100, it takes 4 people to do, or maybe even 4.5 people to do $200. That's the definition of not scalable. It's when 2 people can do $100, but 3 people can do 1,000. That's when you got something that's scalable. And then the last one is that, whatever your secret sauce is not owned, or it's not transferable. So, you're a distributor, but your distributorship rights are not transferable to somebody else without the approval of the OEM. That's going to be a value killer for you that you're going to get worked out. I think Jack has used this example in the previous call. It's like, software as a service, a long time ago, I made a deal with some guy that was a programmer where we said, hey man, we'll share and blah, 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 blah. We never really buttoned down who owns what. And then all of a sudden this guy comes out of the woodwork and says, oh, nay. That's my IP, buddy. You've just been renting it all this time. That's also kind of where this goes, kind of goes sour, or maybe you've never applied for the IP, or alternatively, you've let something lapse, or your process is sloppy. That's really how this one's going to show up. But again, these are really kind of in rank order of how we destroy value. So I think Jack and I's experience, I'll let him speak to it here in a second, is that, probably 1 through 3 are really big problems. 4 through 7, you're going to leave some money on the table, but we can usually make a pretty good story around it. But 1 through 3 are really going to be, big problems in whatever plans you have. So if you have to solve anything, we'd solve those 3.
So I would say, if you want to leave that up there, so I can chat about it as well. So I would agree. I would say that the process not being scalable also may be kind of a middle category, because usually when an owner or a buyer wants to buy something, they want to be able to expand it, unless it's something that they're buying ancillary. So they are taking part of the manufacturing process out of a third party's hands and bringing it in-house. And so ironically, and I've said this before, is that the things that are on this list are things that, even if you don't end up going to closing and concluding a transaction, these are things that are going to make your business more valuable as an ongoing concern. And maybe the second bite at the apple comes a few years later, or at some other time. But this inward, introspective view of things and taking a look at all these things that are on the list is going to make you a better company if you, again, don't proceed with a potential sale and purchase transaction. With respect to the IP, because I do a lot of trademark work, that is becoming more important. And I've said this before as well, with social media, with the ways that people advertise and do business development, the psychology behind it. So take for a moment what I'm about to say is true, even though it may be somewhat unbelievable, which is all of us have photographic memories. But some people are more skillful at it, where they can look at something and glance at it, and it all imprints on our brains, but it's a matter of how we process it. And if you want to get even more technical, it's a matter of our brain trusting what we saw and interpreting it as to a memory. And that's the whole core of speed reading, is that, and I may have mentioned this previously, but I took a class where I was told just to take my finger and go across the page like this, and then read a chapter, and then tell the person what I said, the teacher what I said or what I read. And I maybe remember 1 or 2 words. Over the course of 48 hours, it was amazing what I was picking up. Not because I was reading it, comprehending it, and hearing the words in my head like most of us do when we read. It is that I was seeing it. My brain was trusting that the word was what it was, and I'm then articulating that. So similarly, and that's a long tangent to go off on, but to say that intellectual property and having the rights to that logo, that slogan, those words, and those designs have become exponentially increasingly important in the valuation of the company and what buyers are looking for, because they anticipate participating more in e-commerce these days and having their stuff out there for brand recognition. And if you cannot protect that brand sufficiently because someone may have superior rights, that's a huge issue. It also impacts, I think, the representations and warranties, the indemnifications that are given from a seller to a buyer in other instances. I agree that some of the other items there are workarounds as a buyer, and that may not necessarily tag or decrease or have an impact on the purchase price. But those first 3 things, as Adam said, are very maybe it's stating the obvious, but your books have to be in order. If everything is dependent upon the owner, and once you extract that asset, that person from there, and it can't go on, that's huge. And then the management team, unless you're basically taking the assets and merging them into your current management. But a lot of times the bolt-on needs its own structure and its own management, at least at a certain level, maybe not at the highest C-suite levels, but a lot of times you need to have the management that is in there, good management going along with the business in order to create and continue kind of continuity and have essentially historical perspective and have the institutional knowledge of how things are done. So all those things, and again, you add all these things up, and it's just very easy for me as buyer's counsel, or when counseling a buyer, to kind of nitpick at things and say, okay, purchase price adjustment, purchase price adjustment, purchase price adjustment, unless it gets fixed. And some sellers will say, all right, yeah, I knew it was broken, hoping you didn't see that and figure that out. But yeah, all right, maybe that is a purchase price reduction kind of thing. So it is, in some cases, a very direct dollar for dollar, or at least a value associated with the weakness that results in a very specific dollar amount that is reduced. You place a value on the weakness and you subtract it from the purchase price. And sometimes it is that simple.
So a question that came up that I think everybody's probably going to want to know, but thank you, Robert Mayetta. I could count on you. But he wanted to know if we could make this slide available. So I can email that to you. So Adam, if you could just send it over to me and I'll distribute. So if anybody else besides Robert wants this slide, I will be happy to send it to you. And I don't know, it looked like you had more on there, but it's up to you, Adam, what you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go ahead and share the whole slide deck, because it's part of one of the Vault training classes.
Oh, cool.
So it has the ancillary content. So I've got a PDF version that we can send out, Gary.
Okay, cool.
I think I can post in the chat, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, that'd be even better.
Yeah, I'll do that while Jack stalls for time. So this will be the last question and answer for you, Robert, before I post the presentation. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was Robert asked, when does the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expire? Which, for everybody on the call, that was the Trump tax legislation, which for our client base really had three significant components. One was four significant components, maybe five, maybe six, I don't know. Four significant components that matter. One is it doubled the estate tax limitation. That's going away. Two is it lowered the C corporation tax rates. That's not going away. And thankfully, I'm not going to leave up the middle finger. Three is for pass-through entities that be partnerships and S corporations, you get a deduction where you're only having to pay 80 cents on the dollar of what you earn. That's going away. And then the last thing is the individual. So I'm left with the ring finger, not the middle finger. The last thing is the individual rates were lower, and that expires too. So the only thing that will stay is if Congress doesn't do anything. So you are correct, Robert. It will be a tax increase. The only thing that will stay will be the C corporation tax rate as it stands currently. But the Biden administration has wanted to raise that, as has Manchin. So even that could change going forward in the future if they don't actually do anything. In between, there is some stuff that kind of phases in, like depreciation rules and stuff like that have some increases in the middle of the thing. But that's the bulk of what's going to hit. And that date is December 31st, 2025. No mas. So that's when the day of reckoning comes if nothing changes.
All right, that's good. I love the fact that you said these things are in order because that's what I've seen too. But a lot of times people will focus really far down, like our processes or whatever, like, well, yeah, but, all roads are leading to you, owner, or they've got concentration risk or whatever. So I thought that was really good. Also, just to clarify, Adam mentioned the vault. And so anybody that's a client of BGW, we have been working out some of the bugs between Mighty Networks, which is the platform that we are launching the vault. So anybody that is a BGW business proven process client, you'll have access to this for free. We've been releasing it to some beta testers in the last week. We met yesterday to deal with a couple of those issues that were unknown issues evidently with Mighty Networks, which is kind of unusual because it's a pretty prevalent platform. But in true to form fashion, we've been pushing its limits. So nonetheless, we're going to release it a week from next once all this stuff's done. So if you're a BGW CPA proven process client, a business client, you'll have access to that for free. If you're a BGW client and you're not a business client, you'll still have access to it for a reduced cost. And if you're not, and you don't want to be one of our clients, but you want to pay for it, it's $2,800 to visit it every year. So nonetheless, but we've done it. There's a lot of really, really good content in there. And so you'll see more of that. So have you posted that in the chat yet, Adam?
I'm working on it. You can't go directly to a directory. So I've got to post it to my OneDrive first. So keep on.
So while you're doing that, one thing I want to mention that we've also mentioned in the past that is kind of a sub point in that list is having the right people doing the wrong job and having potentially an owner that is now in the back office that should be out on the street doing the business development and marketing. And there have been many occasions where a seller owner has given the buyer an emotional virtual hug for releasing that seller owner from the shackle of that desk chair and saying, okay, post-closing, we want you to stay on board, but we want you to be the brand ambassador and go out and be a salesperson and do what you did to build up this business. And so that's what we want you to do. And then it's just, this huge relief and burden that's been lifted. And you have to wonder, why did that epiphany not occur? And maybe it did occur, but there was discomfort, or, no, I have to do it because no one else is going to do it. The reality is yeah, there's plenty of hired guns to do those kind of things. There's hired guns that can do sales too. But if that is your talent and that is how you built the foundation of your business, then you should be out in the field and not stuck to the office. But that is something that, again, in this kind of introspective view of your business, as we are suggesting that you do, regardless of whether you're thinking about putting yourself on the market, is to go ahead and go through that and do that self-analysis to see if you and the people around you are in the right roles. And it could be that they were at one time, but it has changed. My current assistant was in litigation, but had a passion for corporate work, and she's fantastic at both. And so, but it wasn't until maybe kind of fairly recently that she said, yeah, I've always wanted to try that. And I'm like, okay. And again, fantastic. So just keep that in mind, that, be aware of your colleagues' talents and if they are being deployed in the right places.
So I'm going to do a call for any questions out there while Adam's still uploading, but I also have one other thing for you along that line. I call it Thrive Wither, Jack. And I did this thing on myself when I discovered my partner's improprieties in 1993, caught him again with his hand in the cookie jar. I'm like, I got to leave my own company. It has my name on the door. Or I destroy him by revealing what he's done. So, or I destroy my name. So that's what brought me to Charlotte. But this simple exercise, Thrive Wither, and everybody at BGW knows that because we've done it. But basically, and it's so stinking simple. It's so Kansas bonehead simple that I can understand it. But you start with the stuff that makes you come alive on the Thrive side. And I say, hey, give yourself 30 minutes to do it. Then on the right side, the Wither side, write the stuff that you really don't like to do. And it may be stuff that you actually are really good at doing, but it just is no longer fun anymore. Oh, Adam has just shared the file. So good job. Upload.
So you gotta find that actually worked. That was a lot of effort.
That's awesome. But what I found with management teams, and I've got one coaching client in particular that's almost tripled in the last 3 years organically. He was burned out before, and now he's having fun, and they're actually acquiring companies, which is really cool, or they're looking at it, but they're expanding and they're doing really great. But if you marry this Thrive Wither, to your point, Jack, get yourself, if you're the owner, and your team in their Thrive zones. Yeah, we all have to do some stuff that's in the Wither. I mean, that's just called life. But if some of those tasks can be shuffled around to the various team members where they actually thrive in those things that make you Wither, great. And especially if you're going fast, do it on an annual basis. We kind of marry that with the function accountability chart. And the CEO is still the CEO, CFO is still the CFO, but there may be functions or little tasks and responsibilities that they need to horse trade. And it's so simple, but those are the kind of simple things that can make huge differences. So again, Thrive Wither. And all right. Adam, thank you very much.
The last slide, now that I see all the slides, I love the last slide, which is, okay, and I'm going to be overly dramatic about this, accept that you are a business center. accept that you have committed some or all of these sins, and then move forward. Because that's what the last I just saw. Acceptance is the answer. So, just accept it. There's no shame in it. Just fix it.
Yeah.
Right? So,
just be self-aware. Like, you're not getting a medal for being too prideful.
Right on.
And it comes out.
Good.
I mean, you can't hide it forever, especially if, whether you're going through a refinancing with the bank, you're going through, and bringing in private equity or other investors. If you're, for whatever reason, it's just, you can't hide. I shouldn't say you can't. In most cases, you cannot hide this stuff for a lengthy period of time, and it's unhealthy. The psychological kind of emotional stuff that, it's on your mind. I mean, it has to eat at you because you can do better. And so now you have kind of a roadmap essentially to at least start thinking about those things and maybe implementing some of these things that are on these slides.
And if you're not self-aware of it, your team is painfully aware of it. It's freeing when you just admit it, quite frankly. Been there. All right. Any questions? Come on. There's got to be something out there besides Robert. No disrespect to Robert. I appreciate your questions. Thank you.
So
were you able to successfully download?
While we're waiting, I can give you kind of two updates on, one is really just a continuation that the Employee Retention Tax Credit Reinstatement Act is still being discussed. I don't think there's been any much progress on that, but at least it hasn't died on the vine yet. And then as we discussed, and I don't think anything has happened on this, but I haven't checked in the last several hours. Tomorrow, there's a deadline tomorrow on the money that flows in our capital. And so, and I was reading an article this morning, and it talks about that there are some Republican senators that are being abstinent, and there are some Democratic Congress persons who are not going to be present for a vote. And so you have a shift in giving Republicans a little more power to hold out a little bit. But we had mentioned this last week, which, well, one is a little more serious, that so Ted Cruz is demanding that the chamber first vote on cutting off federal cash to schools and childcare centers that require kids to get COVID vaccines. And then the other was that a vote to bar funding from being used to provide crack pipes and another that would make it harder for Congress to raise taxes. So I think we talked about the crack pipes previously. So that's what's going on with that. If they don't fix this or resolve this by tomorrow, there will be a government shutdown. If they resolve it, which they hopefully will, then it basically just kicks the can to March 11th. So it gives them 3 weeks essentially to put together or finalize the much larger, and I think it's $1.5 trillion an increase in funding. So, all that, and you have to think about what's going on, across the world and our deployment of military assets and the costs associated with that. And I'm talking about the financial costs, obviously not the human cost of us sending troops over there. So those are kind of some current events that are going on outside of our little bubble.
Yeah, last time I checked, wasn't this all due in October, Jack? Because I think that's the government's fiscal year. So just, to put this in context, we're spending money in the fiscal year that we should have already established. But that's great. I wish I could get away with that.
Yeah. We need just straight in the middle, common sense business owners that are willing to just subject themselves to all kinds of personal attacks and trash to help run the country, because the bozos running it don't get it on both sides. I don't care.
It's universal.
I mean,
that's true.
It's crazy. So we did get a question. Bruce, thank you for this. And it says probably obvious that most of the 7 criteria apply if the business is just downsizing and selling assets, but Would you have any other thoughts in a situation like this?
You know, by specific assets, what's going to be germane to this specific question is going to be around, you know, either I'm selling a customer list, you know, the rights to service the customer. Maybe I'm selling like a product line in the associated or like a business segment, you know, that maybe has some physical property, plant, and equipment that goes with it. So, you know, to answer that question, you know, yeah, it's going to be real similar. I mean, when we have, you know, as an example, we have a client that buys and sells dental practices. So buys a lot, and then from time to time, you know, for whatever reason, he chooses to spin off and sell one. And the same concepts still apply, that it, you know, it really comes down to if you're looking to maximize your value, you know, it's those 7 things. I think what might be a little less relevant is if I'm selling off a segment or a customer list, it could be that the management team isn't as important because they're not coming along for the ride. But outside of that, everything else is going to be fairly appropriate.
Hey, I'm just curious on a completely different subject, but you know, this whole crazy train started with before the CARES Act was even called the CARES Act, and then PPP, or then EIDL, then PPP. But I got an email today on somebody wanting to, you know, basically refute an SBA decision on PPP eligibility. And have you guys run into anything? A few weeks ago we talked, and it's probably been a couple months ago now that I think about it, but we were talking about, you know, the second round running into, you know, having to kind of raise your voice a little bit with some of the banks on forgiveness and that sort of thing. Have you guys heard any more on that, Jack or Adam?
Yeah, the one case that I was referencing within our client base, you know, finally got some movement from Bank of America. I mean, but I don't think things have changed too much in the sense that, you know, look, your first port of call is you got to make sure your bank approves you, because at least the bank approves you at that point. You know, your worst case scenario is the bank doesn't approve you, which means the SBA probably is not going to approve you either. So you got to at least start with the bank is on your side, not against you. You know, from there, in terms of an appeals process, I don't know exactly what it is. I just know there is one, but it's not real well defined. And this particular client, you know, had to get their congressman, which is Dan Bishop, and his office involved, which even then those guys were like, I don't know, I mean, we'll try our best. So it's a doozy. You know, that's sort of a non-answer to say, just make sure it gets approved. And the first way to get it approved is to make sure that your bank approves it. Assuming this means the forgiveness process, not meaning like something got hung up in the forgiveness process, and the bank is saying, hey, or the SBA via the bank is saying you weren't entitled to a loan of this size. Your best bet is just to try to make the facts fit, even if you have to go back and amend some stuff, assuming that you use the money for appropriate purposes. I mean, if you took, you know, $100,000 and, you know, the most common mistake was I took $100,000 and I had independent contractors that were the basis of me getting the $100,000, which is not allowed. And then you never had employees, you never took a payroll as an owner, you know, and you spent all the money on owner distributions and, you know, stuff that was in the 40% category, like rent, kind of dead to rights on that. You do not have a good set of facts. Like, good set of facts are, I got $100,000. The base of the loan was under false pretenses, meaning like we made a mistake. It was the beginning, fog of war. Independent contractors were used as part of the calculation, but I did spend the money for legitimate purposes that are approved, like a payroll and other stuff that fits, then you got at least good facts, even if the loan was made under inappropriate circumstances with hindsight.
Bruce has fired up another good question here. Thanks for that, Bruce. It says, if businesses are reducing their footprint in a post-COVID pandemic, office, production facilities, distribution centers, et cetera, how likely is it that the seller's valuation of the assets are not in sync with the buyers who expect fire sale conditions? How big will tax implications be in these moves for the sellers?
Might need some additional clarity on the second part of the question, but with respect to a fire sale, frankly, we still haven't seen that. I mean, even if you've had some sort of downturn, as long as your profit margins are still kind of in the ballpark what the industry was, and that you're kind of self-selecting down, but otherwise EBIT is still good, you're still attractive, even if it's a revenue decline. We're still seeing decent multiples. It may not, meaning like middle 50% of what you would normally get in a multiple range. So I haven't really, because there's still more buyers than there are sellers currently. Like it's still a seller's market out there.
And I think maybe the one caveat to that is if it's a pure service business, and so really what you're selling is the continuity of the service and the customers, and you're selling a customer list. So that obviously that asset has value, but you may have, prior to the reduction of sales or providing of services, that if that has kind of dwindled down, which is we've seen with various clients and just in various industries, that the business maybe in the seller's mind is more valuable because it's just a matter of time before the services would have ramped up. And in the buyer's mind, it's like, well, no, we think that we just want to buy your list and we're going to incorporate that into what we do. So we're really not buying your processes. We really are buying your customer list. So in a sense, if you want to consider that as a diminished enterprise value because the amount of services that this company is providing has decreased, but there's still value in the underlying asset, which is the relationships. And especially if you have written contracts that are assignable. So longer term contracts. When you have short term contracts, the value of those assets understandably is not as significant. Also, if you have contracts that are not assignable or not assignable without the other party's consent, can also be an issue in a transaction. So all those things kind of filter into the value, and you can see it kind of goes up and down depending on what the consideration or what factor is being considered. So
yeah, so like here would be kind of good facts versus bad facts on this question, Bruce. Good facts would be, hey, we had a geographic footprint that covered the Southeast area, headquartered in North Carolina. A couple things changed. Distribution agreement changed. We had some competitors that entered the market in Georgia and Virginia. Therefore, we're closing those areas down. But otherwise, our North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. So I'm small. But my North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida business is still good business, and those customers are pretty happy. In that case, you're going to get less for the company just because it's smaller. But in terms of the valuation discount associated with that decrease, it's just, hey, smaller EBITDA times same multiple. The bad scenario would be, same story. And oh, by the way, I've had supply chain issues, employee turnover, customers are all pissed off. I've had a lot of customer churn, and I'm like, what whack-a-mole is going to show up today, to put out that smaller EBITDA times smaller multiple, because it's like, hey, dude, you're on life support. And if I don't come save your ass, you're going to be under. So in that case, it's like, maybe you should be paying me for the business, not the other way around. That's really, it really is going to be, fact driven, based on what your situation is. But that's situation A, smaller value, but only because you're smaller. Situation B is now you're really in fire sale mode based on the circumstances.
All right. Good questions. Oh, here we got another one. Oh, there we go. Thanks for your thoughts and insights from Bruce. You're welcome. Thanks for being on here. And if you have more specific questions that you don't want to ask in a public forum, that's fine too. You can just email me and I'll get it in front of the guys. So I'm at gfrey@trustbgw.com, gfrey@trustbgw.com. So happy to help you however we can. And oh, by the way, I was actually telling Matt Linville of Bankers Exchange, our 1031 exchange expert that we've had on this webinar before. I was telling him this week about our 100th week anniversary, and he said, "Oh man, can I be one of the people in the crowd?" And I said, "You might be the only person in the crowd, but yes." So he wants to be part of the live studio audience for what it's worth.
Perfect. The more the merrier. There's plenty of room. It's very cool. It's like stadium seating. It's awesome.
It is really cool. Yeah, it's really cool. And we won't make anybody sing karaoke. And we will prevent Jack from singing karaoke. I just promise you that.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I think you better be careful with promises because it could turn into a challenge.
All right, last call for any questions out there. And then next week, I don't know. We've had 4 weeks on M&A war stories, and that's actually been pretty good, hopefully, for y'all. But we'll have to figure out what we're going to do next week. We'll have to do a little powwow. Maybe we'll do some more on war stories, and maybe we'll give it a break. I don't know. And if there's something that you guys want that you're like, pressing issues that you want addressed, hit me up. Again, gfrey@trustbgw.com, and I'm happy to do it. We'll put this thing up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on this afternoon. And thank you guys for participating. Any last thoughts or?
Do we need to promise? Do we need to promise no dad jokes? Because I don't have any on the 100th anniversary. So if that is what is holding people back, from maybe showing up, I will promise no dad jokes.
Well, the phone lines are lighting up right now. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Just remember, and not too far from now, a few weeks away from now, we will have been just 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
That's right.
A week equals a year. So anyway, have a good one. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.